Hey, welcome back. In today's video, we are going to talk about what the heck is a lagoon and would it be okay to live with one? Let's dig into it. Moving to southern Missouri is the best thing I've ever done for my family. So Webster defines a lagoon as a shallow artificial pool or pond that is used to hold industrial waste or sewage. Yuck. I didn't even know that they held industrial wastes in lagoons. That's way grosser to me than sewer. But I want to start with talking about kind of like everyone's first response when you have never even heard about lagoons. So as I've mentioned, I grew up in rural Northern California. We had to have clandestine outhouses because permitting was so insane and planning and zoning looked more like a SWAT team and they did not like outhouses. So the concept of a lagoon or cesspool was like completely unheard of. And I admit, when I came to Missouri, I'd never even heard of one. And when I saw them and when I heard about them, I jaw dropped, just thought that was the craziest thing I'd ever heard. So I started out as a lagoon bigot. I thought it sounded gross. I thought I'd rather just dig a hole in the ground and not have it filled with water. So I had some assumptions. I assumed that they would be just like thick, stinky sludge, like sewage / sludge. And that's what I assumed would be in those pools. And much to my surprise, so I'm a curious person. So as I started showing more properties and also noticing that here, there's not a stigma. I would show an $800,000 property with a lagoon, and I would show an $80,000 property with a lagoon. So I started to notice that there was not like some sort of hierarchy, and that really lagoons were embraced across the board. And even a lot of municipalities here in southern Missouri still have lagoons as their city sewage treatment plan. So yeah, that was a surprise to me. So being a curious person, I would actually at first get down and like smell them, and I would examine like the whole kind of biology around the lagoon, and was super surprised by what I saw. Here's what I saw. I observed water that was fairly clear and clean looking. That was super surprising to me. I saw a really healthy ecosystem, frogs, butterflies, a little bit of duckweed. You don't want too much duckweed, but I noticed there would be some aquatic, like a little bit of aquatic plants sometimes. And I noticed too, like everything around it just being very vibrant and green and beautiful. And what actually got me the most to start to change my mind about lagoons was that they were absolutely scentless. And I'm a weirdo. I literally would like get down and smell them because I wanted, as a realtor and dealing with people like me that didn't have any experience with lagoons, I wanted to tell people the truth. And if a lagoon stunk, I don't care if it's 200 feet from my house. I don't want it. I don't want like if it actually stunk like poop. You know what I'm saying? I couldn't endorse those, and I was blown away. I still to this day, and I've seen healthier ones versus ones that needed some work, have not smelt one that stunk. And I want to talk about what I mean healthier versus more unhealthy. So here is, and I believe this is also like a state certification, is that you really shouldn't have your lagoon surrounded by trees or any tall vegetation, right? It should be totally open and able to have the sun penetrate that water. And I don't totally understand like the dynamics of it, but when you get that like solar purification, it just, man, it makes the water look clear like a pond. That's actually what's alarming. I have had many times where we are at a property where there's multiple ponds and a lagoon, and the lagoon is not fenced in, which actually is another state standard to have it fenced in. And I kind of can't tell which is which until I see the inlet the inlet line, right? Because the water will look sometimes just as beautiful as the ponds. In fact, I've seen lagoons that look nicer than some people's ponds. So that, just experiential kind of knowledge is what led me to believe that lagoons are really not that gross. In fact, they are surprisingly effective and seem like a good, clean, efficient way to process sewage. So I have gotten into many debates, especially of course with my out-of-state clients, because you have to imagine when you've never even heard of this, it just sounds like, what? Like outside my house, there's a pool of sewage. Like it's got a negative connotation. But here's what I have said that has, I think, really opened people's minds, is that especially if you grew up in an urban setting or even, rural, semi-rural, like not like remote rural, because you dealt with your own sewage in some way, right? But if there was some sort of municipality, you became accustomed to this, which I think is really, really gross. You grew up where all of the sewage and the gray water was pumped into one giant cesspool. And that's really what sewage treatment plants are, is they have these giant pools. Now, sometimes they're in the ground in like lined pools. Sometimes they're in like these giant above ground vats, but that's what they're doing. They're pumping all the water into an artificial lagoon. And then they pump it full of chemicals and do a series of treatment via chemicals. And then often they actually take that water and recycle it. The worst is when it's, in my mind, is when it's actually so polished and purified that it actually is put back into the residential water supply. And or is used in agriculture. And even now, the USDA has allowed raw sewage, right? They've got actually a product that's called sludge, or at least that's what people call it. It's actually what's spreading a lot of these forever chemicals. But regardless, it's raw sewage. And a lot of conventional farmers are pumping that on their crops. It makes someone wonder if that's why there's not all of these giant, like the greens and like the spinach companies who have E. coli consistently tested in their crops, could be from using this sludge product. So yeah, those things are so much more gross than like someone's little lagoon on their property. But I think that one of the problems is we actually don't know how things work. So we don't realize how gross our everyday lives are because we don't even know what large industries are doing and what the government has sanctioned. And then the other thing is that we've been accustomed to feeling safer if there's like chemical intervention versus just using like microbes and nature. So in today's video, we are not going to get into all of the finer details of the state certifications for a lagoon in Missouri, although I am going to link a great article. It was put out by MSU, an MSU extension program, and it's about all of the different like state certifications, right? So that's coming, pretty much straight from the Department of Natural Resources. And they go through and they have, in this article, they have all the different requirements. They've got some great charts, and I actually will flash to those charts in this video. And man, one thing that I really loved about this article, that I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty, but it gives you detailed instructions on how to do your own perk test, which was actually super simple. Often it's digging 4 holes. Anyway, they give the step-by-step instructions. It's very doable. And you have to understand, the reason why I thought it was so cool is in California, I'll tell you what, like the perk tests and the permits will cost sometimes like $30,000, so that's how crazy it is there. So to see something that's just outlined where you can even do it yourself is something that's so Missouri, and just, I love it. And it was actually really interesting. So yeah, let's get into some of the more reasonable state standards. So I think a reasonable state standard is that your soils should be primarily made of clay. Wow, we can really appreciate that living on the property where we're at, where I don't even understand it. Our soil here on this land is primarily sand. And it's like white sand. Like when I sweep every day, I sweep up a pile of white sand and I feel like I have like a coastal house. It's really strange. We're by a creek. I don't totally understand it. If you are like a geologist and you want to tell me how we've got bedrock, giant boulders, and sand, pretty much. So yeah, our soils are not ideal here. We have a pond that does not hold water because of the sand. And I truly believe that nothing would fix that except for lining it. And we've decided just to nix all that. We're gonna fill it with rock, and we're actually going to continue to add sand and make it a 50-foot round pen for training horses. So we are going to reimagine ponds for this property because they do not hold. So would a lagoon be good on this property? No. And that is why, one of the reasons why I'm sure the previous owners put in 2 septic tanks, one for the shop and one for the house. And with that last point, I bring up yet another state standard, which is it needs to be fenced in. The state standard is at least 4 feet tall, and it needs to be either woven wire or chain link. Now, one reason that we personally do not want a lagoon, actually there's really only 2 reasons that we do not want a lagoon. And that is because we have small children, and small children sometimes don't understand that they shouldn't go in certain water. You know what I mean? Like I can already see our little ones like with their feet in that. And the second reason is we have dogs, and one of them is like so water loving. Like he literally lays in ponds. I already know that he would just be in that. So one of our dogs like is a digger, and then one of them is a jumper. And so 4 feet high would not keep our dogs out. And if it wasn't like literally fencing that was buried into the ground, it wouldn't keep either dog out. So dogs and children are really the last negative that I feel with a lagoon, where I want sewage underground, where it can't be got to, is because of critters and kids. So if you do have a lagoon and you fence it in, and you have dogs or small children that would climb woven wire, or a goat, you might want to go higher than 4 feet. So I am also going to show this chart because I thought it was pretty useful. Remember, it's all going to be in the link to this MSU extension article. But there's a bunch of setbacks, right? And that makes sense too. They range from 50 feet to 500 feet, but most of them are just 100 feet. I was kind of surprised. So like from your spring or your groundwater or your well casing, pretty much all need to be 100 feet from that lagoon. Some of the bigger, only one setback was 500 feet, and that was to be 500 feet from a sinkhole, which, you know, that seems reasonable. And yeah, most of them though, on average, were 100 foot. So I have worked with this fella who puts in lagoons and septics, and he used to have all the certifications to do all these state specific and like, you know, state approved lagoons. And the sizing is actually one of the areas that he thought was just overdone. And the way I can describe it is like what the state wants is anything pretty much over 2 bedrooms. They want these giant lagoons that are pretty much the same size square footage wise as like your house footprint. And I just think that that's excessive, and he thought it was way excessive. He never saw that the smaller ones wouldn't function. Now, you do need to go up in size as you increase the amount of people and the use, right, of water in the house, but pretty much 1 to 2 bedrooms for the state certification is 900 square feet, and then it just jumps up a lot. Actually, it adds 440 square feet for every bedroom. And so it goes for a 3-bedroom, 1,320 square feet, and then a 4-bedroom would be 1,760 square feet. And you can see how literally your lagoon would like match the square footage of like the footprint of your home. I have always thought that was excessive, and this guy who for like, I don't know, 20 or 30 years did state certified lagoons, he also thought it was excessive. He ended up letting all of his own personal certifications, you know, expire, and he just said, you know, here's the things that I think make sense, and pretty much it's everything I'm saying. Like, he didn't think that some of the standards really mattered. Just saying. But saying that, I have seen some really sloppy lagoons, and I think that that's unfortunate, and that's what's kind of given them a bad name too. So if you are hiring someone, a heavy machine operator, to do your lagoon, make sure that they understand just how to build a pond. Because I've literally seen some of these where they're like loose, like they never even backtracked, like, or back rolled, whatever you want to call it, and they didn't pack in all of the sides. That's super important. Obviously, you don't want all this loose dirt that's kind of like eroding. And I have seen them where they're in like a thicket forest and there's like zero sun penetration. I think that's a bad idea. A lot of them are not fenced in. So if I bought a property with a lagoon and it wasn't fenced in, if we were gonna keep it, right? If our kids were a little bit older and our dogs were a little bit better behaved, we would definitely, the first thing we would do is fence it in. So I always think that should be done. And then I actually really like the certification standard that has it be 4 feet wide at the berm, at the top of the berm, because, or I guess you'd call it the lip. I don't know. What do you call the top? Anyway, the very top of your lagoon. It makes sense that if you have a nice wide top, that it will help make it more structurally sound. That makes sense to me. And then also, you want that room to be able to do your fencing, but also you want to be able to like not have so much erosion, to be able to walk to the top and not be like this really thin ledge and then have like dirt like fall into your lagoon. So the 4-foot top edge totally makes sense to me. All right, you guys, that is pretty much it. I mean, we can go into a lot more details in terms of the state stuff, but you guys know me. I'm not a real state certified kind of lady, but I do like things that are done well. And I do like doing things that make sense, right? So that's where I think it's important to read all of the different standards. And if you want to dig really deep into it, remember, I'm going to link that MSU Extension article. I think it's super thorough and a lot of the information does seem good to me. And yeah, so I hope that this kind of demystified what for some people is a really scary topic and an instant deal breaker on properties. And lagoons are not that scary. And I also have had a few clients recently where we did find like pretty much the perfect property, except for one detail. It had a lagoon. And I don't think that this should scare people away. Worst case scenario, right? If you're just like, absolutely no dice, negotiate a price drop that will pay for a septic system, right? And then really all you have to do is stop using the lagoon. It's going to slowly percolate out over time, and then fill it. That's pretty much what people do. Now, if you want to get really obsessive about it, I guess you could like treat it as if it's like a toxic waste site, but it's not. And the thing that people need to realize is that God put something in our soil called microbes, and that bacteria and that life breaks things down very quickly. And apparently there's this other purification system called the sun, and it's amazing, and it works so effectively that a pool of raw sewage doesn't even stink. And that did blow me away, but it is true. And I've seen like hundreds of them now, and I can verify this. So yeah, worst case scenario is what I would do is here's your lagoon over here and your house over here, somewhere in line, right, with your plumbing, right, with that line that's going to be going to your lagoon. I would put my septic system so that I didn't have to replumb that line, right, and just have it go to a septic tank, let the lagoon percolate out, and then fill it up. But yeah, if I didn't have kids or dogs, I would totally live with a lagoon. Okay, guys, this was our first video in a series that's going to be called Hillbilly Deep Dive. It is where we are going to look at all sorts of useful stuff. I want to get into some like chainsaw and logging hacks, all just sorts of different like homesteading hacks. I'd like to get into interviewing some of the old timers of just the tricks of the trade, and we can look at it as a preservation of some of the old ways. Okay, you guys, thank you for joining me. You guys know the routine. I've got all of my information in the description. You can call, text, email. We can set up a Zoom, whatever you prefer. Smoke signals, right? CB. I'm gonna get a ham radio soon. I'm actually not. I decided it's too much. It's a lot. Regardless, get a hold of me however you prefer. And if you're thinking about moving to Southern Missouri, I would love to be part of that journey and helping you find the next best phase of your life. Awesome, you guys. Until next time, bye.